Basically, you need to be able to like explain your rationale, and then you need to keep the audience really engaged, and your story has to have like a flow and has to make sense, right? Whereas like engineering, it's more like specifically like,
Logic,
can you
coding.
solve this logic problem, right?
Yeah.
Design, it's like, this is like the problem or opportunity I found. This is how I identified it and validated this market space. This is the people I want to help, and this is like the approach that I took um, to kind
Get
of
to
come
this.
up with a solution that
Mm-hmm.
fix this problem for that person. When I say approach, you want to be very light on process and mostly focus on impact. So don't be like, I did this and then this and then this and then this and then this,
Right.
without explaining exactly like why you did this at this step. Like your kind of design process should be different every time. A hallmark of junior designers is if they have the same exact process for everything. That just means that you hit it in terms of fat and there's like a lot of excessive stuff, and it shows that you're not really efficient and you don't really know what the right tools and methodologies are. For example, like I approach every project completely differently based off like the constraints, the domain, who I'm working with, etc. So that's like the storytelling piece. And if you want, I can show you an example of storytelling for my portfolio. um, if you want, that might take like 15 minutes, so you can let me know if you want me to. But another piece that you really need to be good at is collaboration. And everyone, it's like a soft skill, so people underestimate it, but it's actually really important because engineers can just work by themselves, right? Like mostly like they work with like their manager or tech lead, and they're given like GitHub tickets and they just like do them, right? It's, maybe I'm stereotyping there, so
Yeah, but it's yeah.
like to some degree, I'm broad strokes, but design is very different. Like it's always gonna be collaborative and it's gonna be people first. So you want to come off as somebody that's like, you don't need to be extroverted, but you can't be afraid of people. Like you have to want to work with people, both like with users when you do research. So if you've done anything like site visits or empathy building exercises where you actually interview the user, or like do some sort of like thing where you put yourself in the user's shoes or go to like an actual site, that's usually a really good sign on the user side. And then on the kind of like internal team side, they want to see you demonstrate the fact that you can work with a lot of other disciplines. So I think like you already have a leg up because you should be able to work with engineers really easily, considering your background. But they want to see like how well do you work with other designers and product managers and even support staff, marketing people, researchers.
Mm.
So when you tell your stories and you show your portfolio, you want to show evidence that you've worked with a lot of other disciplines. So this is called XFN, or cross-functional team.
Mm.
Basically, like designers never work in a silo; they always work with other people. And the hallmark of a really good designer is if you can actually, I don't know, somewhere like extract the most value from people with different perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
One of the most common ways, and the number one thing we test for, is how good are you at both like getting, like extracting good feedback and acting on feedback. So, you know, here's a common analogy. So for engineering, right, most people won't have an opinion on engineering. It either works or it doesn't work because it's a very technical craft, right?
Right.
However, everybody will have an opinion on design because
That's
it's very
true.
comment on, right? It's like, I don't like this color, I don't like this image, I don't like this layout. So because of that, 99% of the time, if you're not working with experienced people, you're going to get really, really bad feedback that you can't actually act on. So a bad designer gets super defensive or they just ignore that feedback. But a good designer actually teaches the people around them how to give feedback that's useful. Does that make
Hmm.
sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Definitely.
like if you can like bring up an anecdote like this, or you can talk about this as like an example of conflict, that would be really good. Examples of like how to extract really good feedback is, one is changing the format of your design to highlight the feedback that you want, right? For example, if you want feedback on the branding, maybe you replace all your text with lorem ipsum. If you want to highlight the layout, maybe you grayscale your design. If you
Yeah.
want to highlight interaction, you might use a wire flow instead of high
Mm-hmm.
fidelity. Um, so that's like one way. A second way is like just being really clear and articulate on like this is exactly what I want feedback on and how you can like frame your design, right? Like a bad designer would be like, here's my design, what do you think? A good designer is like, okay, this is a problem that I want to solve. This is what I optimized for. This is the trade-offs I made. Can you please give me specific feedback on this interaction pattern? Or do you think this interaction pattern or layout helps me achieve the goal or optimizes towards this like use case or metric? Does that make sense? For
Yeah.
example, like let's say I was a designer for Instagram's profile, right? I was like, hey, bad designer example, like, hey, what do you think of this design? Um, that'd be bad because you would get like a lot of scattered random feedback. But
Mm-hmm.
a good designer would be like, I wanted to redesign this page to highlight um, some new metrics that we're going to launch because we think it's going to be motivate people to want to invest
Mm-hmm.
time building their online brand.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about this layout? Do you see the difference?
Yeah, definitely.
So sorry, I know that was a bit of a tangent. You didn't ask this question, but if you can articulate this, it'd be very powerful. Um, so where were we?
Communication.
Yeah, that's communication, collaboration, getting really good feedback, working with cross-functional teams. Those are all things that people screen for heavily, and what I think is the biggest difference between a technical coding type interview and more of a design interview. So it's with that story, it's with the people, it's with the team. Um, yeah, does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. It does.
Cool. Um, what do you want to talk about next? Did you want to talk about the life story piece?
I yeah, I think sure. I think you mentioned it's going to be important and interesting too. So let's do that.
So this isn't specific to Shopify, but
Oh, sorry. I just have a question before we
sure.
get into it. So the things that you just mentioned about storytelling, communication skill, are these like the skills they're looking for during like a project presentation interview, like like design, like technical skill interview, or
Yeah.
you're telling about the
um,
life story? Is
so
it different? Yeah,
yeah, all those things. It's more general, but
general.
you'll
Okay.
you manifest it a lot in the story of your portfolio. Also, they'll ask you a lot of situational questions where
Yeah.
you get an opportunity to answer in the way that I suggested. For example, they'll ask, give me an example of when you experience conflict with a team member, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like that's when you can throw in evidence of the things I just
Mm,
said.
I
Um,
see.
those questions are very common. They're like, oh, like or they'll give you a scenario-based question or behavioral-based question, like, oh, what
Right.
would you do if an engineer disagrees with your design implementation?
Yeah.
Like how do you answer?
These are the question I wanted to learn. It's like, what if this engineer tell me that it happens a lot, like when I work with people,
Do you want me
right?
to
Like
give you
engineers.
so what's more helpful for you? Do you want me to just give you the answer, or do you want to try answering it and then I can pick it apart and give you suggestions?
Like for example, right? During the summer, I was working with my friend Alex, and we were thinking of like how to launch the other new 4 widgets that we worked on. Basically, the idea he had is he wants to have like a bundle thing in our website, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then so I created the design where it's like 4 horizontal, just 4 cards, clickable cards.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and then I have a title, which it's like the module name, right? And then Alex went on and put like a gray background,
Mm-hmm.
like underneath. So there's like the white background of the website. There's a gray background that's like outside of the 4 cards. And I'm like, why do you do that, right? So yeah, he's like, it looks like I want to make it like more like a group, but I try to explain to them it's already a group, and then so yeah, these are some small situations that happens to me sometimes when the engineer would put like a random horizontal line between things. I'm like, like there's like no need of having a horizontal line when you have white space. But like, yeah, so those are the things that happens to me, and which sometimes get me annoyed.
Um,
I'm like, how do I communicate that?
sure. Okay, so there's a couple approaches here. That's an interesting question, but it doesn't. So that's an interesting answer. It's a good example, but I don't think it's like highlighting your ability to work with
Right.
engineers.
Yeah. Also, so this is the story, but usually how I approach to convincing them, I would just tell them that like the logic behind. For example, if they put a horizontal line there, I will be like, I just tell them, um, like first I will ask why, and then most
Okay.
of the time the reason would be I just want to separate this section with that section, and I think there should be a horizontal line. Then I would be like, there's a space there already, the white space, and then having we can't we it already does a job of separating different sections. I think adding a line there would make the section looks busy. So that's what I usually say.
I think that's a pretty good answer, actually. So for context, yeah, like the two most common scenarios when an engineer disagrees with you, one is because your solution has like a very high engineering complexity and they don't think it's worth it to implement it, in which case you need to basically be able to clearly communicate the value of doing it your way and the cost to the business if they don't do it that
Mm,
way. And then your example is like when an engineer doesn't fully trust you and throws in their own suggestions and doesn't implement
yeah,
your spec.
that's true.
So there's two reasons for that. One is like maybe your spec wasn't clear, and two is the educational piece, right? So if
Mm,
your spec is super clear and then they still choose to ignore it and add their own stuff, one, that's not a great engineer, unfortunately. And there's also like maybe it's because the communication or like the
right.
education wasn't there. So I think your approach is right. I think I would just like explain it in a more methodical way. Engineers think a lot differently from designers.
Yeah.
Designers, like if you said to another designer, they would agree with you, right? But like saying to an engineer, they might not be convinced. So what you could do is, you want to explain the principle, which in your case is the Gestalt law of spacing. You can't just say like, oh, like the space is enough. You have to show like, all right, so like these elements have a spacing of 8 pixels, which is one increment. That assumes like an association or degree of relevance in the line. And then if you put that group together, that's gonna be one group. And the second group is gonna compose of similar elements, but we put the space at 16. That's double the spacing increment. So that's gonna be at least greater than one or two or more degrees of relation. So
Right.
that should be enough, right? And you can maybe like take your screenshot and like draw out
Yeah, yeah.
boxes and arrows and measurements so it's clear to them. And if they're still not convinced, and you want to show examples of this being implemented by, you know, companies or products that are really well designed and are really
Yeah.
successful. Like this has only happened to me one time, like your exact scenario, but I was like, okay, what do you think are some of the best design products in your opinion that are really successful? And it's like, oh, like I think Spotify and Yelp and Google Maps is really well designed. So I'm like, all right, cool, give me 15 minutes. I take screenshots of all those apps and then just show literally examples of them using
Mm,
this principle. And be like, this is a very common pattern. All the top products with good design have applied it, and this is how I'm applying it to our product. You can even do
interesting.
the reverse and be like, hey, look, this is what Spotify looks like if they drew a horizontal divider between every group,
Right. Right.
right? Like, so you can do stuff like that. There's a lot of ways around
Yeah.
it.
Mm,
Um, does that make
okay.
sense?
Yeah, wow. I just damn. I think when you are a designer for a while, you become really good at just, articulating these things, which
Yeah,
you
and
definitely are very good.
let me also kind of give you some high level advice, right? Have you heard of like fixed mindset versus growth mindset?
Yeah, yeah, I did.
Have you read the book?
No, but it's pretty like
Yeah.
So I've definitely read it somewhere, but yeah,
So like
I
fixed mindset
heard.
and growth mindset, it's basically about being proactive, which is reactive, right? So in that situation, if you had like a fixed mindset and you were reactive, you would just get angry and annoyed. It's like, oh, why is this engineer so dumb, right? Like
Right.
he doesn't get it. He doesn't know how to work with designers. This engineer sucks.
Mm-hmm.
So if you do that, you're robbing yourself of the opportunity to get better. If you had a growth mindset and you want to be more proactive, you can be like, okay, sure, this situation isn't ideal, but in the future, this could happen to me again. And when it happens to me again, I want to be more prepared. I want to be better at solving this problem.
Right.
That's how you kind of like become a senior designer too, right? It's like not your
Yeah.
technical skills, it's you developing like a mental library or like a heuristic map
Mm-hmm.
of these are all the different scenarios I face, and these are all the things I've tried. I know these work best. So in the future, when this conflict happens, you already know this is the best way to
Right.
approach it. And that
Yeah.
could save you like a week of like development time, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's more impact, right? Like what's more impactful? A designer that designs 10% faster or a designer that has a solution for a teammate
Right.
conflict that otherwise would have affected the timeline by a week due to like
Right.
unnecessary discussions.
Yeah. You give me that example first time we chat, and I still remember it.
Okay, well, sorry for being
No,
so
no,
sorry.
no. I'm just saying like it's a really good example that the communication is really important.
Yeah, cool. Did you want to talk about the life story and the current narrative? I think the life story is specific to Shopify,
Mm-hmm.
but it's basically just like a more intense version of a recruiter pre-screen. So we can
Yeah.
practice like your story pitch and kind of like talk about um, yeah, why don't you give it a shot and I'll give you feedback. A couple
Okay.
things to keep in mind. Talk about why you switch into design. Like,
Right.
what can you do as a designer that you couldn't have done as an engineer? Talk about what parts of design and kind of like branching off that, what parts of design or design opportunities, design projects do you find like most exciting? And what do you do like outside of like your standard 9 to 5 to kind of like pursue that ambition and
Mm-hmm.
demonstrate passion?
Yeah.
Then you want to talk about your career path. It should look like you're always like going up and
Right.
you're getting projects that are more complex, have a wider scope, and are more ambitious. And then you want to show that you have like a lot of grit and persistence, meaning like when you have setbacks, you overcome them and you don't give
Right.
up.
And that's like
That
everything
corresponds to the
everything showing to one story.
yeah, exactly.
Wow. Okay.
So like when you tell your story, like don't say everything.
Yeah.
Like like what you don't say is just as important as like what you do say.
Right.
So think about your life story, everything leading up to this point. Think about like what
Mm-hmm.
is the logical flow of like your narrative to demonstrate and hit all those check boxes I mentioned.
Right.
You can write down some notes and help yourself organize your thoughts. I can give you like 30 seconds, or you can just start talking if you want to.
So basically, it's like tell my life story, like why I got into design or how. Is
Yeah,
that the
essentially, like
question?
what we were doing before and what was that light bulb moment that's like, all right, I want to be a designer.
Oh, okay, sure. Okay, I guess I'll just do it. So I've always been really passionate. Well, I guess I would start this way. I've always been really uh yeah, you're right. It's kind of hard.
write
uh
write down your keywords. Like what I
I
usually do is like I have like a bullet point like here. I started it for you.
right.
Just like write down like all the major events and then try and order it in a flow that makes sense and then just have those checkbox things in mind.
I was stuck because I was thinking where should I talking about as a starting point? Like
Um,
I wanted to say I'm always being really kind of creative person where I want to mention about that I really love doing music since I grew up. And
mhm,
then I did a lot of photography.
mhm,
Um when during university. But at the same time, I was doing like computer science where I like to build projects. So then
Mhm.
I got into entrepreneurship. I went through the Next 36 entrepreneurship program. That was my first entrepreneurship experience. And
Mhm.
after that, I was really interested in learning more. Oh, I I guess I can mention but the project was not successful. We failed, and the because because we started with an idea, and then we built out the site, and then we start looking for the audience,
Mhm.
which is very hard. It's the same example as we built the key and we look around for holes, and
Mhm.
which didn't work out. And then I joined a startup as an intern, as a front developer, with the 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 goal to learn more about startup and how maybe a more mature startup was running. During my 4 months of front developer, I I was I had a lot of ideas about how our product could improve.
Mhm.
Um, and I started writing usability reports to my product manager at the time.
Mhm.
After a few reports, we had a meeting, and he really liked my ideas. So he was asking if I wanted to transition into product team. So
Mhm.
I said yes. So since September 2019, I've started working as a full part-time as an intern, as a product design intern,
Mhm.
um, for about 8 months.
Mhm.
Um, After the internship, I spent summer building another side project called Indify with my friends.
Mhm.
Um, it's a plugin for Notion, and we launched on Paraham in end of the July, and we got number 3 of the day, the product of the day, and then we got around 20K users. And
Mhm.
now I'm just back in school, finishing my last year and trying to get my first gig into design. So it's very rough, and
Okay,
yeah.
so that's not too bad. Couple notes. Um, do you have an example of like a setback that you overcame?
Like a setback. Well,
It could be like big or small. It's mostly gonna be subjective, right? For example, you could even say something like, well, knock on wood here, but he's like, oh, Shopify was my dream company. I was working like 40 hours a week outside of school to prepare and make sure I was the best candidate. Unfortunately, I didn't get it. And I was like very, very distraught and very
I
unmotivated.
mean, the set
Talk about like how you overcome those feelings.
yeah, well, I guess like I use this example during my one of so the setback was, the Next 36 project uh, didn't went well because we didn't start with the problem. We didn't really understand the problem space or have a good user research, and then we hop on the idea. So
Perfect. So with that, it's a very good example because you've identified what went wrong. So it shows like you reflected on your past experiences and you're able to come up with like, this is what I would do differently. Maybe you even want to explicitly
yeah,
say that. You
so
also want to, sorry, go ahead.
oh, I haven't finished
Oh,
like
sorry.
the story, but basically after knowing that why the project failed, I the second project I worked on, which is the Indify, started with the user problem.
Mhm.
um, I discovered on the Reddit a lot of people are asking for things, and I went through all the threads and finding out like the things they wanted and kind of really like understand that the problems there, and then we built what they're asking for, and therefore it was successful. So like I guess I could say that I understand the failure and apply what I learned to the new project, and it,
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, you definitely want to call that out. You can also say like, You know, also about your emotions here. Like, how did you feel when you didn't like,
Yeah,
the project was
make it
successful?
more dramatic.
Like, you don't have to lie about it, but like a
Right.
little bit, like you have to make the story engaging too, right? If you're just like,
Right.
oh, I did this and then this and then this and then this, the interviewer is gonna fall asleep, right? Like you
Right.
want to add some like, rising action, like it is a
Yeah.
narrative, it's your life story, right? Like,
Hmm.
okay, so that piece was good. I like how you called out your side projects too, because it shows you do stuff outside of like your day job and your school. So definitely kind of emphasize like, oh, this is my side project. This is why I did it. This is like the problem I was trying to solve and the people I was trying to help, and what
Right.
kind of sparked your idea. I liked how you called out like the metrics and the impact. Try and do that as much as possible.
Yeah.
And you could talk about like what are some of your daily habits, right? Like what do
Right.
you do to kind of keep up to date with the newest design tools, styles, methods, and techniques, right?
Yeah.
Like do you like read daily? Do you do you design challenges?
Yeah.
Do you like read design books? What are you
Yeah.
currently
I
reading? Are you doing an online course?
Yeah, so I wanted to like, because I just covered like a very long time of my university life in very short, and there's a lot parts where I could go deep into it.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder, because like that's why I my question in my head is that which one I should emphasize on. Should I even mention I do photography and I do a lot of music before?
Um,
Like because these things doesn't seem that related, but
I mean,
something, yeah,
I think you can talk about those things because it shows that like you have hobbies and interests outside of work. It might resonate with the interviewer if they also have the same hobbies. Don't spend too much time on it. How I kind of like conceptualize it is at the start of your narrative, like be more general and like don't go
yeah,
into too much detail. But as you get closer to like recent events, you want to be more specific and
right.
elaborate a little bit more.
I see. I can talk about like how after I started doing like design, my first design intern, I was
Hmm.
still very new to design and I didn't know how to like grow as a designer.
Hmm.
So I reached out to like almost like 40, maybe like not 40, 30 designers and booked a call, just basically talk with them. And
Hmm.
I asked, how can I learn? How can I grow? And
Hmm.
that's what I did. And then I read a lot of like median design articles like every day, just like reading that every day.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, and then I can also talk about I love startup stuff. So
Hmm.
I love reading about like product stuff. I went on I watch like the YC startup school videos, like, and
Hmm.
then I read a lot about I guess just product news and then like indie hacker product like but yeah, stuff like that.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. Okay, cool. All right, I think I remembered like most of your stuff. Do you want me to try saying it from your perspective? Would that be helpful?
Yeah, I mean you're very something I remember how I reached out to. I was like, your writing is so good. How do you like the first
Probably.
message I sent to you? I'm really like your writing is just very good. I just want to learn how you can do that.
It's practice, and I'll teach you how to do it after this. It's actually very easy to do. I mean, easy as in like anyone can do it. It's just like the hard part is like doing it often.
That's true.
But anyways, here's my pitch. All right, I am Yuken. So the question is like, Yuken, tell me about your life. I'm like, well, like from a young age, I've always been a very creative person. My passions on the side are photography and music. When I went to school, I went to a degree that I thought would help me solve problems because I really enjoy solving puzzles and complexity. So my background is computer science. I've been just very enamored with like the startup and tech space for the past, like decade of my life. Um, Although at one point, like I had this revelation that I felt like I wanted to be a designer instead of an engineer because I just love working with people. I like to I like the types of challenges and prompts that designers get access to. And I like to collaborate with more people. You might want to swap out those things with something that's more personal to you. I just generalized it.
Yeah, yeah.
And then you want to talk about like, one of my first experiences getting into design was when I was accepted into Next 36's incubator program.
Right.
I had a very interesting time, like kind of working with these people to build this product. Unfortunately, the results weren't very good. We ended up failing because of X, Y, and Z. One really important lesson I learned that day was the importance of like, making sure that you're solving a real problem for the user first. Like we kind of just jumped into the solution without considering, who the end user was and whether or not we're providing value to them. I think that was like a lot of remnant conditioning from when I was more of an engineer. But since then, I've reflected on that lesson, and now with my next project, I joined a startup called Noble, whose mission is to something real estate, help
Yeah,
people
yeah.
houses. Throughout this process, I discovered that I was really passionate about visual design, branding, and growth, particularly for the startup and consumer space. I see a lot of my interests and passions lining up with the kind of 0 to 100 type of work. So that includes, the marketing design, growth design, branding, data analytics, also rapid iteration, prototyping. I learned how to use these tools, X, Y, and Z. And I've just always been really passionate about like being the best designer I can. On the side, like I read a lot of articles on Medium, even daily. Whenever I hit like a gap in my career, I've always seek the advice of others through mentorship. For example, in the past 6 months, I've reached out to 30 designers just to pick their brain and really understand what areas I can improve in. These are some of the insights I've taken away and how to apply them into my life. I also try and consistently like keep my brain sharp by working on side projects that I find exciting, particularly solving pain points that are very dear to me. I'm a very avid fan of Notion. And, just through going on different forums and stuff, I noticed a lot of people having these specific problems. And I believe that I was able to come up with a solution. So, I worked with these people or created a team and I built this product called, was it Indify?
Yeah.
Built this product Indify that does X, Y, and Z. And it actually had these results. I got like 40,000 downloads. It hit number 3 on product hunt for that day or a week or a month. And I continue to work on it today. And everything I think based off all my experiences has led me to want to work in the e-commerce space because of X, Y, and Z. And particularly, I'm really passionate about Shopify's mission statement or Shopify's goal of creating more entrepreneurs and unlocking financial independence for anyone with like passion and idea, because I believe it resonates with me a lot. So you see how that like narrative sounds,
Yeah.
everything converges like
Let's
this.
do Shopify internship.
Yeah, exactly, right? So you just say something like that. And you have this recorded so you can play it back and kind of make it your own.
Here's the offer, sir. You have passed the interview. Damn. Okay. So definitely gonna look back into your pitch and tailor it.
Cool. Let me see if I catched everything. Yeah, so you demonstrated passion, because you made a big switch from engineering into design, which requires a lot of work and commitment. You do a lot of things on the side. You're constantly learning. Your career path, everything funneled from your startup experiences, a type of work you've done in startups, towards like a skill set that's very suited for Shopify. And then, is a candidate curious and continuously learning. You talk about all the side things you do, the mentorship or the menteeship, the reading, the writing, etc. And then signs of grit and persistence is when you overcame the failure at Next 36, learned from the lessons, and became a designer as a result of that.
Yeah.
So that checks all the boxes for me. And then if you phrase it like that, you get the offer or the pass.
Yeah. I see. Because like when I talk about it, it's more in terms of my timeline, but you talked about it in terms of different aspects they're looking for. So you place them like that, which is really cool.
Yeah, like it's still loosely chronological, but only very loosely. Like
Yeah.
it can't sound like I did this